Joining us today for the Furious Flower Poetry Hour, and thank you to everyone who is joining us on the live stream. My name is Lauren Francis. I'm one of the producers of our weekly radio show, With Good Reason, out of Virginia Humanities. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today for this Furious Flower Poetry Hour. I had the pleasure of attending the Furious Flower Poetry Conference in 2014, and here we are almost a decade later, and I still can't say enough good about it. So today we're going to hear from the founder and former executive director, the legendary Joanne Gavin, along with the new executive director, Lauren K. Elaine, and Elle Renee, the center's new assistant director. So we're going to reflect on Furious Flower's past, look ahead to the future, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So I will start by reading everyone's bio, and we'll get into the conversation. So Lauren K. Elaine is the author of 2 collections of poetry, Difficult Fruit and Honeyfish, and the co-editor of Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry. She is the executive director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center at James Madison University. The legendary Joanne Gavin is the founder and former executive director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center and professor emerita of English at James Madison University. She is the author or editor of numerous books and anthologies. Elle Renee descends from proud Black Appalachians and writes about her ancestors. She is the winner of the International 2022 Rattle Poetry Prize. Her work has been published in Obsidian, Tin House Online, Poetry Northwest, and elsewhere. She is the assistant director of Furious Flower Poetry Center. Everyone, let's welcome
everyone. Hello. I've been told to speak into the mic so that those out there can hear. It is a joy to be in Charlottesville and to be at the Festival of the Book and to come into this room and see all of my friends. My friends from the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities. It's now called Virginia Humanities, but I'm still stuck in the back, in the past there. And to receive all of those wonderful hugs. You know, it has to be the best board that I ever served on. The very best board. When I came to those meetings, I was empowered, I was excited, because the staff was so empowered and excited. So I just want to say, I love you all out there. If I start naming all the names, I'll miss someone. So I'm not going to do that. Yeah, that's right. We won't have it down. Yeah. So that legendary thing. I kind of like that. Well, I like it because it relates to Furious Flower. Furious Flower is legendary.
It is.
And you know probably that the first Furious Flower conference happened in 1994. And when I started planning that conference in 1993, I didn't know it then, but I was planning the historic conference that was the first conference that was done solely on Black poetry in the nation and probably in the world. I learned later. Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, I'm really proud of that. But I didn't know it then. I just knew that I wanted to honor Gwendolyn Brooks. Therefore, the title, Furious Flower, the time cracks into furious flower, lifts his face all unashamed, and sways in wicked grace. And I thought, when I was doing the conference, that to honor her, that phrase would not only talk about her, but talk about the movement that her poetry inspired. So it was amazing. There were more than 35 poets and critics invited to that conference. But then people people like Sam Allen and Naomi Long Madgett and Maury Evans. All of those people came. They were some of the people who were given the Lifetime Achievement Award at that conference. But then all of these young poets came. And it was exciting to host Kevin Young and Natasha Trethewey and Major Jackson and Elizabeth Alexander. Now, some of you who are familiar with Black poetry, American poetry in general, know that Elizabeth Alexander, outstanding poet, is now the head of the Mellon Foundation. You might know that Kevin Young, who came as a very young, fledgling poet, is now the head of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And Natasha Trethewey, she was the National Poet Laureate of the United States. We had a powerhouse there, from the very oldest, our eldest, to the very youngest. So once it was over, I basically said, okay, I pushed out that baby. And you know, if those mothers out there, you know, if you do that, you say, don't touch me, to your husband. I don't want to do that again, you know. But later on, you know, I talked to my friend Sonia Sanchez and I said, Sonia, everyone is talking about Furious Flower and when are you going to do this again? And it was about 5 years out. And she said, Joanne, that was such an amazing conference. And it also took so much out of us who came because everybody wanted to be there. Why don't you wait a little longer? And so I waited another 5 years. And in 2004, we did the second one. And in 2014, we did the third one. Now, I am really, really excited now because we're looking at 2024. And do you know what? I retired just in time. And these lovely women who flank me here are those who are bringing the creative energy to preparing for that particular conference. And you know, it's going to be amazing because these women are amazing. So let me say this about Furious Flower. We have, over the last 25, well really now it's closer to 28 years, we have done everything from children's poetry camps. I see Ross Gay out there. Ross, we decided early on to grow our poets. So the very first activity we gave was a children's poetry camp. The next one was a kind of relief program that we did called Morning Katrina because we thought, what can we do in a disaster? So that was 2005. I could go on and on, but we've done readings. We have an online journal, which she has really perfected, called The Fight and the Fiddle. We do annual readings. We have seminars to honor living legends, truly living legends, like Lucille Clifton, Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Yusuf Kamenyaga, and most recently, Haki Manabuti. We've done collegiate summits for our students all over the country who gather at JMU to be inspired by a group of poets. Oh, there's so many things. And I breathe a sigh of relief when I think about those things because I don't have to do those anymore. I can just come and enjoy them, just like I did last night. We had Mervyn Taylor. So I came, she invited me to dinner. I went downstairs at this wonderful place called the Golden Pony, and I enjoyed the open mic, and then Mervyn Taylor came on, and what a fabulous poet. Originally from Trinidad, and gave some just beautifully structured poems. So I hope that in the Q&A that we will get to elaborate more on Furious Flower. I don't want to take up too much time because, you know, I could talk the entire hour. But what I'd like to do is read a poem. And this poem recently appeared in the Iowa Review. Kevin, I am so excited about publishing poems. I told Kevin that when I retire, I'm going to start publishing my own poems. And sure enough, my first poem appeared in the Iowa Review. Yay! So, off to a good start. This poem is called Blackstone. And it is a poem that allows me to reflect on a portion of the trip that I took to Africa, West Africa, 50 years ago, 1971. You know, I wasn't as smart as Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou got a whole book out of her trip to Ghana. You know, I just went there and just enjoyed myself and then collected the postcards, and that was it. I didn't write, but now I'm writing about those experiences. So, Blackstone. I just want to, my explanation, Gorée Island is the place of the door of no return in off the coast of Senegal. Just wanted to make sure that you knew that. On a sea trip to Gorée Island, I watched Senegalese boys who swam near the sides of the boat, catching coins tossed by the passengers. Some boys caught them between their teeth. Their glee in the sport belied the danger. The scene repulsed me. I am once again on the streets of Dakar witnessing the twisted beggars whose pretzel deformity earned them more than the other cripples. Even though I knew that the boys reached and grabbed in the shark-ready waters out of need, I hated the history that brought them there and the corruption that fixed them in place. Soon we were in sight of the door of no return, where the boats anchored in the roadstead barely bobbed in the bluest water. The Maison Leslies stood just beyond the port. The pink and turquoise building was freshly painted for the tourist gaze. A tour guide waited, his frame gracing the portal, his clothing sand-colored against his ebony skin. We followed him up the stone steps to the entrance of the house. The walls were washed in rose pink. The rooms were mostly bare. Only a few pieces of ornate furniture to suggest a former opulence. We ambled slowly to the upper rooms with their arched hallways and looked over the balcony to the yards. Surveying the expanse of land of sand interrupted only by patches of grass, he said casually, on this side, the men were exercised, while the women and children were kept here. But all I could see were naked bodies ravaged by a succession of Dutch, British, French gold seekers. All I could hear were the many cries, cursing the doula people who traded in souls. The guide took us to the back stairs. The pastel walls disappeared in exposed stone with the look of centuries lined our way down. There's no color in the dungeon, only dirt floors and narrow openings. The spaces were not meant for breath. The guide practiced in telling the story, told how 30 or 40 were crammed into rooms no larger than a nursery. The porridge placed in pots in the narrow between-ways was eaten by the strongest. Many died with sustenance only a few bodies away. The other tourists went on, following the voice of the guide. I stood there in that small place, and for a few minutes, I could feel the crush of spirits speaking to me. I was not afraid, just acutely aware of the sadness. Though the dirt was long since cleansed of the fetid odor of bodies, I imagined that I could smell resilience mingled with the stench of fear. Along with this human tragedy, I knew I would never unsee it. I needed something to honor the visitation of spirits that I witnessed. I pushed my body through the square opening in the cellar, onto the rocky shoreline, and picked up a black stone, the size of a petite loaf of bread. I wondered how many had tried to save themselves, how many had crawled through the opening to the sea, with nowhere to go but the crashing waters of the Atlantic, too weak to swim the distance. I put the black stone in my handbag. I would carry it. I would take it past the places they had walked in Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria. It would go with me home, safely across the Atlantic, over sanctified bones. The black stone would remind me of those who were marched to the door of no return and made it across. Ooh. So that is what we remember 50-some years later of that visit to Goree Island and going into that dungeon. It was a spiritual moment for me. I will never forget it. And I tried to put it in this particular poem. I want to start right there. And if we have time at the end, we will answer some questions.
Thank you so much for reading that, Dr. Davin. So you answered my first question, what would have been my first question, excellently. I was going to ask you, how did you know in '93 that it was time for a Furious Flower? And now I want to turn over to you, Lauren, with the future of Furious Flower. What do you envision? What are you thinking about?
Thank you for that. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you for that. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the wonderful blessing and enormous challenge of following a living legend as a presence, as a leader, as a visionary. But what Dr. Gavin has so wonderfully done at the center is really laid a foundation. We are blessed to have a Mellon Foundation grant to take care of all of the audiovisual material that Joanne collected over those 20-something years, which is, turning out to be an enormous task, actually, to preserve. They're like, oh wait, this is still on VHS. We gotta fix that, right? So we are working on the archives. We're working to make those accessible. We're working to make them building blocks for the future, a future that we can't yet imagine, but that we want to be able to put into the hands of poets and scholars. My vision for Furious Flower is also, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, And so I very much feel as though as the nation's first academic center dedicated to Black poetry, it's really important to me to expand that idea of Blackness, to make it more global, to make it more diasporic, to be able to have all of those experiences in conversation with each other intentionally. And so, for example, this year we focused on Caribbean-ness, and so we had Shara McCullum from Jamaica, Mervyn Taylor from Trinidad as our visiting writers, and next year we hope to focus on the continent and have some continental representative poets speaking. And so that idea of thinking about the magnitude of Blackness, of Black writing, of Black legacy in poetry and culture, and all of the branches of that tree is also part of what I'm thinking about. And I think that in general, the idea of legacy, right, and of rooting and seeding, which is not mine, right, which is the beginning, and to just keep that growing, So those are just a couple of the things that are in my mind.
Are there certain things that you've come across in the archive that have really stayed with you, that you're really excited
So we
about?
are not yet in actually developed. We are partnering with JMU Libraries. I should say this is a joint grant, also with JMU Libraries, who Dr. Gavin gifted the archives to, and so they have the Fierce Flower collection as well as Dr. Gavin's papers there, and they're the ones going through all the boxes and videotapes. But you know, our students back in 2019, when we were really trying to get funded and we weren't being successful, like let's make a vision of what we want this to do. And so we had a great class at JMU, an X-Lab class, which involved 5 departments, 5 professors and a visiting poet, and they made a prototype of what this archive would be. And so, you know, it was really, and you know, we can talk about this later too, just have the students really experience Woodland Brooks. I am a Black, you know? And they were like, whoa. And so just again, thinking about the possibilities of the archives to inspire these new students, right? And also to have this like historical material enabled by technology, right? To come to life again. It's just been wonderful. So there's some gems in there. We would picture the Ta-Nehisi Coates in the audience of the first Fierce Flower conference. Yeah, young Taima Jassy. You know, it's just there's some great things on the first conference. There's no 4, but yeah. So there's some gems in there.
Wow. Yeah, he was at the poetry slam. He was at Howard. Yeah. And look what he became. Oh my God.
You mentioned wanting to expand the idea of Blackness. This is a really broad question, but what would you say, this is for all of you all, is the state of Black poetry right now in America?
Flourishing. Flourishing is the word that comes to mind. Or, you know, I'm obsessed right now, which y'all will tell about it, but with the, you know, we are each other's business, we are each other's harvest. This is harvest season, I think, for Black poetry in so many ways. You know, Kaveh Khanum hitting up its 25 years, Black Poet Laureate, it's Black Junior Black. I mean, we're doing it.
National Book Award winners.
Say it now, right? Pelitzers. And so I think the thing that we get to do in this moment is celebrate. I mean, that's our mission: celebrate, educate, preserve. We get to celebrate what it means to thrive in that particular fashion, in language, in literature, in letters, in a country where it was illegal to read and write. Right? So we get to celebrate that. We get to educate folks about what that legacy is and how it's always been there and enriched, you know, to complete the story of American letters. And then the preservation of that is what, you know, again, we're really invested in making sure that there's not erasure as is wont to happen to Black contribution. And to make sure, again, you know, we talk a lot about living archives, evolving archives, innovation in archives, so that history becomes not just historical and fossilized, but activation for the future. And so, yeah, that's stuff that excites me, and I think that's what we get to work. That's what we're seeing now. That's what we're doing now, and that's what we get to engage with.
Yeah, and I think I would add. So I feel really, really blessed and honored to be a part of Furious Flower Poetry Center. We are represented on this panel 3 generations of poets. And I think in the way that Lauren looks at where she's from, Trinidad and Tobago, where Dr. Gavin has laid the founding, direction for the center, I'm coming up as an emerging poet, a poet who's working on their first book. Lauren has 2 books. Dr. Gavin and Lauren have published many poets. And so we kind of bring together these unique perspectives. I'm also someone who is a descendant of Black Appalachians. So it's very important to me to think about the diaspora also from places where people are not obviously seen, in mountain towns and cold towns and hollers where Black people live, and a lot of people don't know that we exist there. So I think that's very important to me to think about broadening the scope of what Black poetry looks like in places that people have forgotten, quite frankly, right here in the United States. I think about also what does it mean to Dr. Gavin created this legacy of young people coming up now. The young people who are coming now up in poetry have very different experience. Social media, publishing outlets, collectives, right? So I'm kind of coming from the vantage point of tapping into that, tapping into what does it mean to be Black in Montana? What does it mean to be Black in the hills of West Virginia? What does it mean to be Black in the landscapes of tobacco fields in Virginia? All of these, the wealth of our environments. I'm also a plant lady, so I think about eco-poetry as well. I think our dynamic niches that I'm finding more contemporary poets leaning into, these ways in which sometimes, especially younger poets coming up, we contort ourselves to feel like, who do I have to be to fit in? And now this generation is coming up and saying, I am perfectly wonderful just as I am, and look at the perspective I have, and I can contribute too. And for me, being a new faculty member at JMU, it's been amazing to see students lean into what makes them unique. That wasn't my experience growing up in the 80s and 90s. It was very much about how can I be like everyone else around me. So I think our kind of views combined, I feel like we're hitting it from all angles, which is really exciting. It's also exciting, I tell Lauren, we are also enacting history ourselves and taking up Dr. Gavin's mantle, making sure that the things that we're working toward are sustainable, that there's a plan for who comes behind us even. And we're also thinking about how to really tap into all of the different channels now that we have available with social media, with pandemic hybridity, as we're having here now, opening up scholars to learn what kind of things we've accumulated in our archive. So I'm an undying optimist, and the future is really, really bright for Black poetry, but I'm also recognizing that the decisions that we're making right now is affecting people who have yet to come. And so that's a huge responsibility. And it's one that I'm humbled to be a part of making with Lauren.
Thank you so much for that.
You see why I'm so excited about just sitting back? I mean, these 2 women are fantastic. Fantastic. And I just want to say, another fantastic woman who worked with me just walked in. Kalela Williams, who is, and do you understand that she, when I sort of said to Kevin, I said, if you get Kalela to come to work for Virginia Humanities, you will get a gift. And I think you're going to see that is true. Matthew, I'm so happy to see you. This is home territory, so I have to give the shout out. But I want to also say to all of you, I was sitting here thinking about Bravo, and I was thinking about the leadership model that he showed me. And you know what? Maybe I did pick up some gems from him because I really believed and still believe in a succession plan. And I think I'm winning. You know, so it's been absolutely fabulous to see these two women and really our staff in general just take this notion and just run with it. And I would
It's
say
more than a notion.
yeah, yeah, honestly, it is. It's a big thing. And think about this. When I started planning Furious Heart, 1993, that was 220 years after Phyllis Wheatley published her first book. That took a long time to get to a conference that would be a celebratory event for Black poetry. So it was a long time coming, but we're certainly here, and we are flourishing.
Thank you for that, Dr. Gavin. So your comment or your questions about like what does it mean to be a Black person in Virginia amongst all the tobacco fields or in Montana? It takes me back to going to Furious Flower Conference in 2014 and going to Harrisonburg for the first time, and I was like in the car like, are we going the right way? Are we going the right way? So what, I guess to start off, Dr. Gavin, what made you want to house the center in Harrisonburg at JMU?
Well, you know, this may sound flippant, but I was there. I mean, honestly, I knew at that particular time, I'd been there 7-8 years, and based upon my work in the honors program, I was directing the honors program, my students loved poetry. And I brought poets in to our brown bag sessions and readings. And I realized that at that particular time, JMU would be a good welcoming space for poets. Even though it is a PWI, even though we had just, maybe 8% who were African Americans, and it's even smaller now. But I felt that our students would be welcoming, and sure enough they were. Because, you know, JMU was not a very welcoming place when I got there in 1985. And I wanted to make sure that it would be welcoming, so I waited. I waited until then to do the conference, but it really was not just that direct. I just wanted to have a reading. And I wanted Gwendolyn Brooks to come and do her second reading at JMU. But because she said when she was here and Piedmont Community College invited her and she read there, my students were amazed at her generosity. The fact that she took an hour and a half to sign autographs. They said to me, can we have her come to JMU? I said, she's been here. 1986, my first full year there. And I said I would invite her back. And she said, I won't come this year. I won't come in 93, but I'll come in 94. So Lauren, I had a whole year to plan. And after I started planning, people like Rita Dove and Sonia Sanchez and Amir Baraka, they said, I want to be there. So it did become the Gwendolyn Brooks reading. It became Furious Flower. And that's how it happened. So it wasn't though I set out to do this thing. I was just sort of pushed into it in a way. You know?
Turning the idea into the flesh.
That's right. That's right, yeah.
So now turning to the new Vanguard, Elle and Lauren, what sorts of advantages or opportunities do you see with the location of the center?
So one of the things I'm grateful for, no shade VH, but being an academic center, AKA located and affiliated with the university, means that, you know, I don't have to raise my own salary. And you know, we just have, what did I told my dean, I said, you know, you have to be the sugar dean. We need some money for this, we need some money for that. And so we get a lot of support from the university, you know, in terms of facilities. facilities, in terms of personnel. Again, this partnership with the libraries, again, we were keeping the files, all of the archive in the basement at the center, and the libraries came, and that team has been since 2017 working on sorting that material. So we really get to take advantage of and be enriched by the academic. You know, we have access to students, right? And you know, as Dr. Gavin said, there's not, we are a predominantly white institution. However, you know, with that in mind, we're able to expand the audience for Black poetry, right? So many students are encountering for the first time, for the first time in a serious way, the things that we're offering, the poets that we're bringing to campus. You know, Mervyn Taylor was overwhelmed yesterday, you know, and he was sitting in my car saying, "You students, they were asking me these questions, they bought my books, they were thanking me for the workshop, they're so nice." You know? And that's what we get, because they have not encountered someone like that with that perspective. You know, again, he lives in Trinidad, lives in Brooklyn, you know, and so they were hungry for it, and it's a hunger that they might not even have known they have. And so to be able to take advantage of that, I know, I love that two of our colleagues at JMU were in Dr. Gavin's class in 1994. The head of special collections, who's in charge of our archive, and one of the English professors were both in and that conference changed their lives. And that's the joy of being associated with a university.
And I think the location is passing that on, thinking about the ways in which we can engage the students around the archives. So I'm a little bit of an archive nerd. My forthcoming collection is containing genealogical records and my family history and maps and all kinds of things like that. And so for me, it has been really important for students to feel like, you know, the archive was a place for them. You know, that it wasn't that they had to put on the white gloves and kind of ask for permission. Particularly thinking about like Black archives and what does it mean for people who were once considered property themselves to save stuff and hold stuff and value it and pass it down. And so in my class right now, I'm teaching a Black feminist womanist poetry course, and next week we will be at Special Collections in the archive, where my students will present to myself and library staff and each other new things that they found. So I might discover some things next week that are in our own collection. So I think that's really important. I think also the location of Harrisonburg as a newbie, right, because I just moved here in August, I've been surprised to see the tremendous diversity of immigrants that we also have in Harrisonburg. The ways in which we are situated, where we can offer programming, as Lauren's saying, that people might not have encountered before. And it's this beautiful thing, even with workshops that I've done around the community, outside of JMU. You can see what happens even in the span of 2.5 hours, where you give someone a pen and a model, and you encourage their voice, what that opens up for them. You can see that shift in their belief that their stories matter, that someone took the time to help them cultivate the craft, to know how to tell their stories. And that is really heartfelt work that Dr. Gavin started, not just with the students at JMU, but beyond. And I'm really hoping that we continue to keep tapping into that, because oftentimes college is a place that sometimes people don't think is possible for their lives. Right, and so the work that we do outside of the PWI matters very much. It matters to Dr. Gavin, it matters to Lauren, it matters very much to me. I always tell my students, you may not necessarily leave the class being a poet, and my students in the community and at JMU, but I want you to gain the tools to feel like you can go out in the world and speak, and trust that people will hear exactly what you're saying.
And one more thing about being at James Madison in particular, you know, Constitution, Father, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I think is really, that we've been able to tap into a little bit, and plan to lead into even further is the idea, we're very invested in the idea of civil discourse at JMU, right? To think about how might, in the history of the president and the relationship to American society, civil discourse and, social discourse and political discourse. And the fact is that has always been the purview of Black poetry. And so there is no talking Black poetry without a discourse of liberation, without a discourse of equality, without a discourse of justice. And so we're also uniquely located in a place that is, presents itself as focused on these things. And so we're able to tap into that desire to say, hey, this is a part of that story. And you can't get to have that story without this one also.
And just very practical kind of thing. We did a memorial service for Lucille Clifton. It was a poetry reading. It was fabulous, called 73 Poems for 73 Years, honoring the years of her life. And Hakeem Matamuti stood up and he had the very shortest of her poems to read, maybe 3 lines. And so he used his time to say, the reason we all gathered here is, of course, to celebrate the life of Lucille Clifton, but also to support Joanne Gabbard. How do you come to a place and fill an auditorium in a town that has no airport, no train station, no bus depot? How do you do that? But the auditorium is filled with 1,000 people. And they come because they love poetry and they love to recognize poets. So that's been the miracle of Furious Flower. And I think that's going to be maintained.
I think so too. I remember being at the conference, having no real concept of where we were outside of the gathering space. So much so that I moved to Harrisonburg in September, and I didn't really remember that festival, that conference was in Harrisonburg until very recently. It was its own place. It was its own world unto itself, and it felt good. It felt really good.
Yeah.
So I really like talking about it. So I want to look ahead and look out. Who are you guys reading right now? What are you excited about?
Oh, what do you think I have to know? Okay. I am reading a lot of Caribbean writers right now because in my second life, I'm a graduate student at the University of Virginia doing my PhD in Caribbean literature. And so I'm reading wonderful folks, Kai Miller, I'm reading Desiree Bailey, I'm reading Safi Sinclair, who was a UVA grad. I am immersing myself in the contemporary literature of a place I call home when I'm not calling Virginia home. And confusing my parents with what do you say home, what do you mean though? And so yes, I've been reading a lot of that work and being inspired by it.
Well, right now I just finished reading Staya Hartman's
The
Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. Wow. What a book. What a book I recommended.
Okay, and also Kevin Kwashi's on the Aliveness, Black Aliveness. Read it if you haven't read it. Read it. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Black Aliveness is the.
Could you repeat those? It's a little bit hard to.
Oh,
Yes. Staya Hartman, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments.
and this is Kevin Kwashi's Black Aliveness.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I am really interested in models of hybridity. And so right now, I just finished Courtney Faye Taylor's new book called Concentrate. And so this book, she's telling the story of Latasha Harland, who was murdered before the LA riots by a Korean shop owner. And she talks about the ways in which they were both subject to white supremacy. And she talks about Black girlhood, and that book has photographs and lyric essays and lineated poems, and it's beautiful. I just got Robin Hoff Lewis' new book, which I'm really excited about, that also has photographs and lineated texts and some that are not. I also loved Shayla Sabri's field study. Oh, no, you know that one? Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I'm looking at the ways in which writers are using lots of different types of forms to tell stories and coming at them from different angles and what that may allow.
Thank you all so much. Go ahead.
Well, you know, it's just, you made me think about Patricia Smith's
Yes,
wonderful
Unshuttered.
Unshuttered. So, little pause for the cause. Buy that book if you can get it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. You know what? I read a poem. They didn't get to read a poem. Is there time for this?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. You want to start? Oh, I can help. Okay, I'm sorry. It's really funny. I was trying to think about and then not having time to think about what the poem would read. I haven't read from Difficult Fruit in a long time. Difficult Fruit has a lot of letters to myself. My running joke being, if you talk to yourself, you get committed. If you write to yourself, you get published. And this poem is called 15, in which I'm writing to my 15-year-old self, and I will ask you to suspend disbelief in the first line because, you know, this book was published a while ago. But you'll get what I mean when I say that. And it's about vision, right? And how we try to imagine into something that we can't really imagine into. 15, I'm writing from 29 to tell you we live. I remember our dreams, the long white halls with no end, and how when we tried to imagine life after high school, it was blank and solid as a grave. We thought that meant there was no future for us, and practiced accepting our absence from our own lives. No more best friendships, school dances, no more yearning for boys to whom we were already invisible. Now we are almost twice your age. The face we couldn't envisage is yours, but leaner with shadows of mom in its profile. In 2 years, we will step on our first plane and fall in love with flight. We will move like wind across the world. We conjugate French class verbs in Nice and Paris. We follow Jesus to Bethlehem and Galilee. We have lived in places you do not yet know exist, like Harrisonburg, Virginia. I see now it will all begin with you. The path away from home, marked with nothing. Who could walk it but a girl who has already made peace with her own end? 15, looking back, I understand our quiet death weight, the surprise of our persistent daily waking. We never could have imagined this.
Since we're in Virginia, I'll read one of my Virginia poems. So as I said, I write a lot about my family's history. And so my family's story, this side of America, began in, as I said, tobacco fields of Virginia and Chatham area. I had an ancestor who was the one who made that decision to leave. And so I think a lot about the leavers and the ones who stayed. And this ancestor became a coal miner in West Virginia. And as we say in my family, traded one kind of dirt for another. And so I've been doing work trying to track that kind of Black migration. And while I was doing this work, it took me to Pulaski, Virginia, where my grandmother was born. And so I will read a poem that has in part truth in an experience I shared while I was trying to find out more about an ancestor. Genealogical trip to Pulaski, Virginia. The mayfly swarm undulates like the perfect hip roll. mottled bodies plow brown bodies midair. Wings fade as fine gossamer in June sun, buoyed by a buzz too quick to be caught by my eye, which doesn't want to bear the witnessing. How nature persists in getting on with it publicly. Life, sex, death in the span of a day. I turn away, overcome by shame. I look through my Ford's cracked glass at white mile markers blurring a black highway. Why does our making always begin in denial? When I find my great-great-grandmother, Frances Houndshell, in census records, branded mulatto and a mother at age 9, I do not wince. I practice numbness. Focus only on getting back to the alpha mama who owned her own body, her own name, somewhere off the coast of Ghana or Nigeria maybe, where her breath, not her sweat, was enough currency. In Virginia, it's common to see the dead mayflies skip across pavement like flat rocks tossed side-armed at stream surface, then lodged in sidewalk cracks among orphan pebbles, sticks, and sprigs of grass. I'd rather look at uncountable rows of tobacco leaves which leave me breathless, dizzy even. All those green ears, flat like an elephant's pillow, hang woody scents heavy through my car vents like next of kin hugs only at family reunions. In death, female mayfly lips freeze into an O, as if readying a whistle, as if leaving evidence of no, after the males give chase, grab their tiny legs, drag them to the ground. It happens like this. Whole lives purpose for labor and procreation. Night collects her bounty. By daybreak, bodies piled by the hundreds on windowsills and porch corners in the middle of a passage pedestrian stroll between a jail and a courthouse. The nice white genealogist at the local library tells me Frances's age must be wrong, an error in reporting. But I know a nymph can be snatched from her skin, molt and molt until she becomes something new, gains wings if only for a brief view of the dust she will soon call home.
Thank you all so much for the conversation and for sharing your work. And now we're going to open it up to Q&A.
I just wanted to testify that all of what you said is true. I went to the first Furious Flower in 1994 and it changed my life. I'm really just so grateful to all of you. Thank you.
Do you have any more questions?
While people are thinking of questions, welcome Samantha. Samantha is Samantha Thornhill. She's going to be here in the space in a little bit. She was our second poet in residence at Furious Flower. We're so proud of her. Well, I'd like to ask a question. How many of you have, other than Nancy, been to Furious Flower, a Furious Flower conference, or a program? Yeah, okay. All right. All right, it's just across the mountain. Just across the mountain.
It's definitely worth it.
It's worth it.
Who's next?
The fourth Furious Flower Conference will be held in September of 2024. Save the date. Well, I don't have a date yet, but mark the calendar. 2024, September 2024. And you can follow the plug now. You can follow us on social media or go to our website, jmu.edu/furiousflower, to find out. We have 7 programs or something like that happening in April for National Poetry Month. We stay busy. So you can always catch us, and similar to this event, we also do hybrid stuff, so you can find readings on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, all the things. You don't have to, you can't come over the mountain, we will welcome you, and you can find us on the digital space as well.
And I'm gonna jump on the plug with another plug, for the plug. Our opening National Poetry Month on April 1st, on Saturday, so 1 week from this Saturday, we will be at the Oak Spring Garden Foundation in Upperville, Virginia. That is part of the property of the Mellon family. Money Mellon was the historic garden designer of the Rose Garden at the White House. And so we will be on this, at this setting. Lauren and I will be sharing work from her books and my upcoming work, my upcoming book. And sharing some poems and a wine reception, but it's also a beautiful place for those who are plant lovers or garden lovers. And you can find more information about that also online. And I brought beautiful brochures, which are right there on the side of the room. So grab me one and take one so I can release a little weight going back to Harrisonburg. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all again for coming out.
Dr. Denham, I wish I could ask this in a better way, but how did you birth that vision? I mean, how did you feel that? Was it, I'm just not asking you now, I'm not asking the question I'm going to ask, but I mean, you just felt it in you?
Well, you know, but it's a good question. There was a confluence of reasons why it worked. Some of my friends who were teachers like Trudia Harris and Daryl Dance and teachers who had not taught African American poetry. And they hadn't taught the poetry because they didn't have the books, the critical essays to teach African American poetry, Black poetry, effectively. So I thought, if we're going to do a conference, if it's going to not be a reading, but it's going to be a full conference, let's make it so that it produces something. So that first conference produced several essays that were then collected in an anthology called The Furious Flowering of African American Poetry. The University of Virginia Press published it about 4 or 5 years later. And so there were actual critical articles, and also later on came an anthology of poems. There were anthologies of poems, but you also need critical language to talk about poetry. So that's how it happened, but probably the biggest thing that I accomplished, making sure that we videotaped each session, because I thought that those people who couldn't get to Harrisonburg could enjoy and be inspired by the readings and the discussions that went on at that conference. And thinking it was going to be a one-shot deal, I wanted it out there. So it was calculated, and in fact, Tyamba Just was on a panel at AWP just recently, and he said he couldn't come to that first conference. He was a very young poet, but he discovered those videotapes in the library, and it really directed his career. So that was amazing. So you know what? I didn't see the whole vision. I couldn't have seen it. It probably would have scared me. you know, I didn't see the whole thing. But as I kind of walked into it, it became clear that I was doing the work I'm supposed to do. In the church, they would say I was doing God's work. Man, I was doing God's work.
And in this room, we can say, it's a poem. You don't know what you're trying to write. You just put a word down, and then you put the next word down. And you put the next word down, you trust the word to produce the next word. And then the word happens, right?
Will the archives or like when we work with other poets, will they be available to the general public?
Yes, absolutely. The archives are already public. I mean, the stuff that we've digitized so far is already, you can just go to JMU Libraries, it's a state school, taxpayer money, y'all get it, it's there.
Yeah, the 1994 conference and the 2004 conference is available on JMU Libraries right now. That's already been processed.
Do you have to be a student?
No. That's already processed.
You can have community access.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes, and you can see the panels. There's tremendous musical performances. My students and I have been looking at those. But I do want to just, before we wrap up, just give another praise for Dr. Gavin, even though at the time you're saying that you didn't know what you were doing at that time in terms of the scope of the vision. But so many Black makers do their work and they don't document it. There's so much that we have no succession plan was made. Nobody knew while they were doing the thing and making the flyers, and they didn't record it, they didn't document it, the papers are gone. And so I really hope that people also understand what a treasure that you had that foresight to say, oh, let me keep these programs. Because guess what, Lauren and I, 40 years later, are looking at those programs to inform how we're planning the 2024 conference. It's so amazing. I don't want to let go of that idea that it just kind of happened. You know, yes and. There's so many ways in which Black artists do their work in silence. So many ways in which Black women do their work in silence and are not given their flowers. And so what a blessing it is that we have the time and space to give her flowers.